Hey folks, this is Alexander Winn,
Lacey Hannan.
and we're here to talk about chapters 4 through 6 of The Martian, picking up from last week. Lacey is putting the finishing touches on her read through right now, and that's what you were going to be laughing at.
Yes. I freaking love this book.
Right? So we did the first 3 chapters last week, and we're doing the next 3 chapters today. So first off, general impressions. What'd you think of this section?
Okay, yeah, I still love Mark Watney.
Yes.
He's still my favorite, and we get to meet new characters.
Yes.
And
that's a big development.
Yes, and of course, then we see a narration change.
Yes.
Which is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the mixing it up and changing it, because I even pointed out in my notes that there's some things that I could see getting a little old.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to dive into the other side of this story.
Yes, indeed. But first, we start off with chapter 4, and I did actually notice something that doesn't get mentioned in the book, unless I just glossed right over it, which is chapter 4 starts log entry Sol 32, which means he has officially been on Mars longer than he was supposed to. This was a 31-day mission,
Ooh.
and chapter 4 starts on day 32, or Sol 32, Sol being the
catch.
term for a day on Mars. Yeah, so I just thought that was a funny little thing that they just kind of glossed over.
Yeah, he's too busy.
Yes.
He's got shit to do.
That's certainly true. So a bit of behind the scenes for you. I have one line here in my notes that says, starting off with deep chemistry, but still approachable, but definitely taking the gloves off with the science. What I put in one line, I get the impression that you have more than that.
Oh, yeah. So you guys, I have like
Pages and pages and pages of notes.
on.
My
Listen.
notes are that long.
Mine are not. Listen, if you think my husband can be verbose, I can be too.
It's true.
No, I guess it's a lot of it has to do with I want to walk through his
process
plan.
for making water.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Can we do that?
Yes. Do
I
you want me to just launch into it, or do you have questions?
No.
Okay. We're going to be here for a while.
So before we even get there, I
Yes.
really like how he approaches this, because he lays some information out, and then he
I really like how he approaches this is like the tagline for this book. Like that's all this book is. I really like how he approaches this.
So he lays out some information for us, and then he lays out his plan. And, okay, you can follow it. Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. But then he says, as you can see, and I'm sitting here going, oh, that's so nice of you. I really appreciate you. Like, this is exactly the thing that I want to see from entertainment, is believing that the audience is smart enough to follow along.
Yes.
And we don't see entertainment like this very often that believes in the intelligence of its audience. Mm-hmm. For example, it's not that a lot of movies or TV shows or anything like that actually specifically condescend to their audience. Yeah. They find new and interesting ways to condescend to us, like Gravity. Where they just remove all of the details and they gloss over everything. And it's this is boring, because you're only making the story about the character's emotional reactions than you are to why are they here?
Yeah, it's the lowest, it's literally the lowest common denominator, in the sense that if there's anybody in the audience who isn't going to get it, we're not going to do it at all.
Yeah.
And
it makes the characters so much more interesting when they know their stuff. Like, everybody in the world has something that they know a lot about. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you might not be an expert. You might not have, even a bachelor's in it. You don't have to go to college to know a lot of things about the things you're interested in.
Yeah, and it's not always science. Some people know a lot about Star Wars, and that's cool. But if you're then making a Star Wars product, you want to appeal to those people too. You can't just make everything for the
people
casual.
who don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I really appreciated this. And I actually read that line, just that first phrase, as you can see, multiple times, because it just charmed me that we were oh, he thinks we're following along, and I sort of am.
Yeah.
But the whole line is, As you can see, this plan provides many opportunities for me to die in a fiery explosion. And my thought process was, no, I can't see that. Not really. I could see one way. One way was pretty obvious, yes. But many, I was like, that's a lot of confidence in me. I appreciate you. That's more confidence than any of my science teachers had in me. So you're very kind, man.
Well, that's both funny and heartbreaking.
Welcome to being a woman.
Yep.
But for the sake of the story, I'm glad that he goes on to actually outline all of it.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean I totally understand all of it. So I would like to step through it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna say what I think is happening.
Yeah.
And then you tell me what's actually happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I'm an idiot, you guys. I just think that
no, this is complex chemistry.
It's complex chemistry.
I mean, like I said, it's still approachable, but definitely taking the gloves off.
Yeah.
This is
And it's okay. So just to be
most people have never heard of hydrazine.
Yeah. So just to be really clear, Alex, while knowing a lot about science and happily being willing to talk about it a lot, is not actually an expert. So we're going to give us all a lot of room to make mistakes, and if we do, feel free to politely call it out because you're intelligent and you can do that.
Yes,
and
indeed.
You can do it with kindness.
If we can be here having studied film and stuff, talking about real science, we invite you to join in as well.
Yes.
That's to me, honestly, not to veer off too much, but that's the fun part of science for me, is that it's not just about being wrong. It's about learning what's right. And so if we say something on air that is wrong, then hey, jump in the comments and tell us what we missed, because that's cool.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I want to learn it. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So step 1.
Yes.
The MAV, which is the Mars Ascent Vehicle. I'm going to figure out what all vehicles are here because I keep getting really confused. Okay, let's hold on.
So
let's just go through them real quick. We've got the MAV, so the Mars Ascent Vehicle.
Yeah.
The MDV,
The Mars
Descent Vehicle, which one? Wait.
So they came in from the Hermes. The Hermes is the interplanetary ship that they were on.
Okay.
The really big sort of space station looking thing from the movie.
Uh-huh.
The MDV is a ship that they took from the Hermes down to the surface of Mars. The MAV was there waiting for them.
Right.
So they do their thing on Mars for a while, and then the dust storm hits, and they have to evacuate. So they get in the MAV, Mars Ascent Vehicle. They go back up to
all
orbit
that's left
to
there
the
is
Hermes.
the essentially launch pad aspect of it. There's a portion that does not go up with it.
Yeah, the MAV landed a couple of years ago in preparation for this mission with essentially a launch pad, like you were saying. That launch pad portion includes something that can create fuel, but it's a very slow process.
Which is why it's been here for so long.
Exactly. Oh. So that and also just sort of prep. They want to make sure that it's there and ready before they send anybody.
Yeah.
So it lands, it starts making fuel, they blast off, but it leaves the fuel plant behind. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the MDV, which he's been stripping for parts.
And there are 2 rovers.
And
a HAB.
Yeah. That's all the structures in the area. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, unless you count the solar panels, which are
Well, okay, but these are the big things.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
The things that you can get inside: MAV, MDV, HAB, 2 rovers.
Okay, but the MAV is mostly gone. Yes. Got it. Okay, so from what's left over of the MAV, he is pulling out the fuel plant, which has CO2 in it. And he'll release that CO2 into the air in the HAB, and the HAB's oxygenation system or oxygenator will turn it into oxygen at its normal rate.
Yeah. So just to start out with, the challenge here is make water.
Yes.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make water, and pretty much everybody knows water is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom. So basically, the problem that we are trying to solve here is how do we get those ingredients?
Yes.
How do we get oxygen? How do we get hydrogen? And so his solution for the oxygen is, hey, this thing over here has been collecting CO2 from the Martian atmosphere, and inside the HAB, I have a tool that's supposed to take my CO2 and recycle it back into oxygen. So if
Yes.
I just go take this tank of CO2, take it into the hab and just open it, and it just vents all this CO2 into the atmosphere of the hab,
Right.
the oxygenator kicks in and goes, whoa, there's way too much CO2 in here, starts pulling it out and making oxygen. So now he has the O for his H2O.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So step 2.
Yes.
He's also pulling hydrazine and how do I pronounce this? The catalyst, the iridium?
Yeah, iridium.
Oh, look at that. Go me. Okay. So he gets that from the MDV, both of those things.
Okay.
Right? And he says that hydrazine is super toxic and it will burn him, so he doesn't want to breathe it, and he doesn't want it to spill on him because then he'll have chemical burns for the rest of his life.
This is rocket fuel. You don't want it to touch you in any way.
He also refers to the iridium catalyst as a reaction chamber. It's the same thing. Is he using those interchangeably?
He's putting iridium in a reaction chamber. So basically, a catalyst in chemistry, a catalyst is a thing that starts a chemical process but does not actually participate in the chemical process. So in this case, he's got a bowl because hydrazine is a liquid. He's got a bowl. He puts iridium in the bowl. Iridium is just like, it's like a metal, like you can just picture rocks. And then he pours hydrazine into the bowl. The iridium makes the hydrazine react, but it doesn't actually use iridium in that reaction. So the iridium is still left behind and he can keep using it. And in the meantime, hydrazine, which the chemical formula for hydrazine is N2H4. And what happens when what happens when hydrazine meets iridium is it starts a reaction that splits it from N2H4 into 1 molecule of N2 and 2 molecules of H2. So he's already got the O for his water, and now he's going to take that hydrazine, and for every molecule of hydrazine, the iridium will split it into 2 molecules of H2.
And so what he's done is he's taken all of the bags and he's put it over his little lab setup he's got going. And he's duct taped everything. Yeah. And then he took it was some sort of air hose, I think, from someone
from one of the spacesuits.
Yeah, which I really like how he refers to it, because he says that he is murdering a spacesuit, and I just really enjoyed that. It's hyperbole can be really fun.
Yes.
So anyway, he makes this tent. Yep. He puts the air hose at the top, and kind of hangs it essentially, and so that hydrogen is really hot after this.
Yeah, the reaction that iridium causes releases a lot of heat.
And it rises, so it goes through the chimney, and what he's doing is he's essentially standing on the outside of it with splinters of cross-turned torch. Yep. And he's
burning it out the top of a chimney. You can literally picture like a chimney, like a house. There's a bowl with liquid coming in and iridium, and it's creating hydrogen, and the hydrogen is being funneled up through this chimney, and then at the top of the chimney, there's a flame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what is exothermic again?
So chemical reactions have 2 different types. Endothermic is a reaction that takes more heat than it generates, and so it creates cold, basically. This is like reactions used to make refrigerators and that sort of thing. Chemical reactions can actually reduce the heat around. And then there's exothermic, which is like burning wood. The chemical reaction that happens when you burn wood releases more heat than it takes to make the reaction happen, so it produces heat, and that heat heats up the wood even more, which produces more heat, and that's why fire is a self-sustaining thing. So what he's saying is that this reaction with the iridium and the hydrazine is very exothermic.
Yeah.
It releases a lot of heat, and so...
Right. I'm going to learn so much just from this book.
Right? It's so much fun.
It is so much fun. The thing that kind of made me laugh is he talked about how it's going to make the hab really hot, and he mentions that it's 30 degrees Celsius in there at one point. And he's from Chicago, and I get it. He's a scientist. He is not using Fahrenheit. Like, that's just not what's going to happen. Yep. But I like that he's talking to his audience, which obviously... for the sake of suspension of disbelief, he's not talking to us, the audience. He's talking to NASA scientists. But I still like it. Still made me giggle that he used Celsius instead of Fahrenheit as an American. And
well, one can only hope that by the time we're landing people on Mars, that maybe we will have actually switched over to Celsius.
I'd be fine with that. But I was just like, way not to cater to me, man, you jerk. Now, I think, if I remember correctly, like from our time in New Zealand, I think that's like high 80s. Don't quote me on that, but I think
it's a little hotter. It's hotter than that. 30 degrees, I think, is a hot day, but not burn you alive.
Yes, but hot is not the same thing in New Zealand as it is here. Like, it doesn't ever really hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit in New Zealand. You look it up.
30 degrees. Oh, look at that. See? You're smarter than anybody thinks you are. 30 degrees is
rude. You?
86 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, see, I would have pegged it. I thought 30 degrees was more like 95.
I'm so proud of
100.
myself. So proud of myself.
Silly Americans and not knowing Celsius.
I remembered. I just remember that the peninsulas, the northern peninsulas would get to like the highest of like 34 degrees Celsius, and that's still, I don't believe, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So,
Fair enough.
Anyway, the other thing that gets mentioned here is Martian vampires, and I'm really intrigued. So if anybody out there is just like, I need a writing prompt, I'm really stuck.
Yes.
If you would do a scientifically accurate vampire fantasy on Mars, I would read it. And I don't like vampire stories. I mean, Buffy's great, and the Dresden Files has some great vampire storylines, but I'm not really into them, and I would absolutely read that. So if you do it,
there is so much potential for fantasy stories on Mars. Just putting it out there, you could tell a werewolf story on a planet with 2 moons.
Ooh, see,
like it goes on and on and on. There's so many different like sort of tropes to play with on other planets.
I would absolutely read it. So, send it to me if you ever do it.
Yes.
But yeah, so then at some point, where are we? We've
got our oxygen from the CO2. We've got our hydrogen from the hydrazine.
Yeah.
And the plan is, I'm just going to burn it at the top of this chimney, and it'll basically just get really humid in here. And it's gonna create water, but it's gonna create water just in the atmosphere. And then the water reclaimer, which is another tool of the HAB, will pull the water out of the air and put it in tanks so that now I can. And
really, it's not gonna be, the tanks aren't gonna be big enough, so he uses yet another spacesuit.
Yes.
That he later
calls the cistern.
Yeah. Yes. Which is great. I really like that.
So I do absolutely love, just on sort of the fun side, he's burning hydrogen, he's making water, things are going great, and there's this hilariously optimistic moment where he's just like, I'm feeling good, everything's going to plan, I really think I'm going to be able to pull this off. And then it's like log entry the next day, and he's like, I am absolutely going to die. And this is such a perfect just jinxing of his whole situation.
And that was one of the things that I pointed out is I have kind of said before that he likes to end us on that really high note and then take us down like a couple of pegs.
The contrast is just so funny.
And this is the biggest contrast he's done so far, and it made me laugh, but simultaneously like jokes get kind of overdone very quickly for me. So when we get to chapter 6 and we start seeing new people, I was like, oh good, because I don't want his jokes to wear out. And he's a great writer, so maybe they wouldn't. Maybe he'd keep finding new ways of surprising us and having fun.
But it's good that he didn't have to.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is a great way of raising the stakes. We cut to the next day, and he is not only sure that he's going to die, he is hiding in the rover and does not want to go back to the HAB. Like that is
a big deal.
Yeah, that is a great way of just like instantly raising the stakes.
I love that he's like, NASA specifically prepares in every way for things to not get on fire, and I'm bringing fire into the HAB. Yeah. And it's another way of making it really apparent that this is like he said, it's a terrible, dangerous idea, but it's the one he has. Yeah. There is a line in there that I want to know if it's a reference.
Okay.
So he says, damn it, Jim, I'm a botanist, not a chemist. It rings familiar, but I don't know.
That's Star Trek. There's a running joke in the original Star Trek from the 60s that McCoy keeps getting asked to do things, and he'd be like, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a lawyer," or "Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a whatever."
Whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I knew I had heard that somewhere. Thank you. I'm feeling.
So we catch up the next day, and he's hiding in the rover because, and this is one of the notes that I have, is I love how he makes plausible mistakes. This is not the story of a superhero who just knows how to handle every single situation perfectly. This is a guy who comes up with really smart plans and is really proud of himself and then misses something and then has to deal with it. And it's so much fun to watch him do that. And in this case, he made the mistake of assuming that he was burning all the hydrogen that was coming out. And he ended up realizing that there was way too much hydrogen in this air.
And this is not the first time he makes this mistake. I mean,
yeah.
Well, okay. No, what I really mean is in an upcoming chapter, he makes another similar sort of mistake.
Yeah.
So it is interesting to watch him be human.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is overwhelming. Like, the amount of plans that this guy has had to come up with to stay alive is, like, I'm sorry, The Revenant does not compare.
No.
Sorry, Leonardo DiCaprio. Just putting it out there.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is...
I like how he... Oh, I
go for
like
it.
his ending line of this chapter.
Okay.
Are you there? Are you ready?
I was just going to say, this is one of those moments that every once in a while in this story, I like to take a moment and imagine he could have died here. Like, this could have been the story, is that they come back and they recover his logs, and he's like, hey, I'm going to try to make water, and apparently he blew himself up, and everybody kind of, like, wonders what went wrong. But he didn't.
Well,
like, it's just sort of a parallel universe of The Martian, is like, how could he have...
And he's trying to kind of stop that from happening. One of the things you said on the last episode is we're always seeing things after he's done them. Yeah. And here, we're not. This is
he interrupts himself.
Well, but he says, I'm going to do this. So in case I die, like, everyone knows why. Yeah. But this is not something that he's written in there because he missed it. Yeah. So people would still wonder why. It's just kind of this neat little, like, I'm going to tell you what stupid thing I'm going to do. So in case I die, you know why it happened. And he was just thinking about, like, bringing fire into the hab and making an explosion happen.
Just in case I make the Watney Memorial Crater.
Yeah, which is so good.
Macabre, but hilarious.
I really liked the ending line, which was, "The hab is now a bomb." And I was just like, it's so succinct. Yep. It's so, yes. It's so true. Yes. And I don't know. I was just delighted by it. I was delighted. Apparently, Iman Economist has a book, series for us. The Gentleman Bastards is a fantasy story set on Mars. So
really,
thank you. I'm putting that on my list.
Yes,
I'm so excited. Yes, thank you. I barely get through this book, so Alex is going to be like, "Oh, why are you reading? We are here. You're supposed to be done with your notes."
Who knows? Maybe we'll do that next.
I know. Well, yeah. See how scientifically accurate it is.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like vampires and stuff. Whatever.
All right. So chapter 5.
Yes. So the first thing that I have noted here for chapter 5 is, I really enjoy that there's this sort of repeated cycle of presented with a problem, and then he gives us like an index of his assets. Like, this is what I have. This is what I can work with. This is everything I have at hand. And that is, to me, the strength of this story. Because so often, solutions are presented just as kind of like a fait accompli. Like, Sherlock Holmes walks into the room, he looks around, and he says, I know who did it. And maybe he walks you back through his logic after the fact, but it's really about him having the answer. Whereas this is a story about someone finding the answer. And the first step to that is, what do I have? What can I play with? What can I use?
Right.
Sort of the central tenet of science, and it's the central tenet of this story, and that is the strength of this whole book.
That's a good way to delineate the two things.
Well,
I like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to be honest, my brain stopped working while I was reading chapter 5. So most of my notes are not actually about the science. So I hope you enjoyed chapter 4's discussion, because for me, chapter 5 does not have as much.
Did you get what you were looking for with the hydrazine? Like,
yeah.
You're fully there for
what is hydrazine though? Like, what is it used for?
It's rocket fuel.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Then yes, I'm good.
Yeah.
I will say that for this chapter, I probably can't regurgitate any of the science. However, I wrote down a lot about the writing and the voice because I loved it. So, you know.
Well, I've got a few things about the science, so I'll shore it up. But before we get to that, I will have to say one of the most important elements of this story gets introduced in chapter 5, and that's disco.
Oh, God, yes.
And I'm so happy. Because disco has become like this big part of The Martian, especially thanks to the movie, because they lean on it pretty hard. And we finally got there, and it makes me
funny
cackle.
Thinking that Jessica Chastain likes disco. She just doesn't smile much, so it just doesn't sit right with me.
I really love, we'll get to this when we do the movie at the end of this, but I really love, not only do they have, her liking disco the way they do, but like there are moments in the movie that aren't from the book, where at the very end her husband or her boyfriend presents her with like a new record that he found at some like record shop, and she gets like really excited, and like even when they're on their way back to Earth, he's video chatting with her, and he's like showing her this disco record that he found, and she's like really into it, and it becomes this sort of part of her character beyond just the gag.
I'm gonna have to
him
rewatch it because I really don't remember that, and I'd love to see Jessica Chastain excited about disco.
She lights up about a new find. It's charming as hell.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
Now listen, I will tell you, when we're kind of jumping to the disco, but it's fine, whatever. I will say, if you were like me, I did not like disco until recently, and I will tell you what did it. You learn about the history of disco, and you are going to be way more into it. Go find the podcast you're wrong about, and go find the episode titled something along the lines of, hold on, I've got it. Just disco, demolition, disco, derby. Those 3 words are in it. Disco, demolition, and derby. Go find that one. It's from sometime this summer. And it's most excellent. I love that podcast, and it's great.
Newsflash: one of the founders of Edgeworks Entertainment gets more enjoyment out of something by learning about how it works.
What?
Film at 11.
Shut up! Oh my God.
So this chapter is basically about how do I defuse the bomb that is the HAB. And what he comes up with is there's too much hydrogen in the air, so he's going to remove the oxygen for the most part and just sort of burn it off in little bursts. And that sounds like the scariest thing ever. Sitting in a giant just bubble of hydrogen with a little bit of oxygen and burning it a little bit at a time to try to wear it down.
But what did he mean? What did he mean by that?
What do you
burning
mean?
It off?
So basically he wanted to make water.
Right.
And he needed to get rid of the hydrogen because it's a burning
that's too much.
hazard. And so his solution is you can't just burn all the hydrogen away because it will explode. But hydrogen can't burn without oxygen. So he actually gives the numbers. The atmosphere in the HAB is 64% hydrogen and 9% oxygen. So what he does is he removes the oxygen from the air. And so that way the hydrogen just can't burn like at all. Like you could light a flame or whatever and it just wouldn't burn. But he can then take an oxygen tank and basically do the exact opposite of what he was doing originally. Instead of an atmosphere of oxygen and he's got a little bit of hydrogen that he's burning, he's got an atmosphere of hydrogen and he's got a little bit of oxygen that he's burning. So it won't explode because there isn't enough oxygen to sustain.
So he's actually burning the oxygen.
They burn together like it's
right.
But yes,
but what
he's
is
got a little bottle of oxygen that he's releasing, and he's got a flame in front of it as he burns a little bit of the hydrogen away each little burst of oxygen that he's releasing. And so the plan is just over time, every time he does it, a little bit of hydrogen gets turned into water, and if he just keeps doing that, he can get the hydrogen levels down to the point where it's no longer an exploding hazard.
Right.
Which brings us to his next mistake. And I know you have a lot of lines that you specifically quote in your notes. I've got one here. Everything went great right up until the explosion. And this is actually, this is a great moment in the book, but it was also really nice for me because I read The Martian years ago, and then I watched the movie, and I've watched the movie probably 20 times since then. And there was a moment in the movie that I never really got. I never understood. It never quite made sense, which is in the movie, they skip this part about the hab filling up with hydrogen and becoming a bomb. And he just burns, he does his thing with the chimney, and he's burning hydrogen, and he lights the fire, and he celebrates, and he goes, woo! And it explodes. And he's thrown backward. And then he's later talking into the camera and talking about how I didn't account for the oxygen that I was breathing. And I was always like, what does that even mean? Like, the oxygen that you were breathing is the oxygen in the room. There's no extra oxygen just because it's coming out of your lungs. It's just the oxygen that is, and of course you accounted for that. That's the oxygen that you have, man. And it never really made sense to me. And so I was so gratified when I was reading this chapter for this episode because that's not what happened.
Oh,
in the book,
So
he wasn't accounting for the oxygen that he was breathing because he had removed the oxygen from the atmosphere. And so he had his little bottle of oxygen, and he was sort of squirting out little bits of oxygen and burning it. But he forgot that there's a big source of oxygen right here in front of his face.
Yeah.
And every time he exhaled, he was releasing more oxygen this way. And so he had his flame here, but there was a whole bunch of oxygen coming out of his head. And it filled up to the point where the whole room exploded.
So it's, it's one of those things where the conversation can come back to that age-old question, not ages, because movies really only, I mean, they've only been around for a century.
Question.
Yeah. Is the book better than the movie?
Yeah.
And in this way, I'm not going to say one thing's better than the other. I will just say one thing's more scientifically accurate than the other.
The adaptation was flawed. They wanted to keep the moment of Mark Watney blowing himself up, but they removed the reason that he blew himself up, and they just sort of hoped that nobody would notice. And to their credit, even I didn't notice, really. I knew that something was wrong, but I didn't know what was going on until the book.
So,
but yeah,
experts would know, but the rest of the world would be in the dark.
Exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, he forgot to account for the oxygen that he was breathing, but luckily he got enough of the hydrogen burned away that by the time the oxygen built up to the point that it caused the explosion, there wasn't enough hydrogen to blow up the hab. It just sort of flashbanged in his face, and yeah.
What I like about this part is he plans and he explains to you exactly how he's going to do it. He's going to take out all of the potatoes. Mm-hmm. They have started rooting but not sprouting.
Yes.
And he needs them to not be in the hab because he needs to turn the temperature way down.
Yes.
And so he puts them in the rover, and there's a moment where he says that he jimmied it so that the heat would stay on. Mm-hmm. And I loved that phrasing. Again, for me, everything's about the voice in this chapter. To jimmy something is to MacGyver something. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people who use the word MacGyver out here, mm-hmm. or different takes on that. But to me, to jimmy something, it feels so Midwestern to me. And I love it. And this guy is from Illinois. He's like, I don't know. Yeah. I'm just like, this is my tribe. This is my Midwestern tribe. And I loved it.
Well, and really, I mean, to me, to MacGyver something is complex. It's like you're creating this thing out of, paper clips and baling wire. But it's like
probably did MacGyver it.
Well,
he's tricking NASA.
What I'm saying is to MacGyver is a big complex thing. But what he was saying was specifically that it was like pretty, like he kind of, the equivalent of hit it with a wrench. Like he was kind of hacking it to stay.
You don't know
to
what
keep
he
the
did.
heater on.
You don't know what he did.
And in that same spirit, I have a note here that I really appreciate when he's trying to trick the oxygenator into pulling the oxygen out. He tries all these sophisticated things. He's going to like pry it open and hack the operating system, or all these things. And finally, he just has to like tape bags over the sensors. Like it's not, the solution here is not some big complicated thing. I love, again, just like the fact that Andy Weir resisted the urge to make Mark Watney a superhero who knew everything. Mm-hmm. He also resisted the urge to make every solution brilliant. Sometimes you just need a bag over the sensor. Yeah. And, there's a moment in the BBC Sherlock series where Sherlock gets tricked by Moriarty specifically because Sherlock always expects everything to have a clever solution. And this wasn't clever. And so it was like a blind spot for Sherlock, because this is a very simple thing, and Sherlock was looking for some big complex thing. And so I really appreciate that Andy Weir gives us that. He gives us that, like, you know what? This is a guy who is really smart and sciencey, but he's not head in the clouds. Sometimes you just got to hit it with a wrench, and that's good enough.
Okay, so I've got a couple of things about the voice of this that I'd
Yes.
like to... So at one point he says... There are 4 different safety interlocks that prevent the regulator from letting the HAB's oxygen content get too low. But they're designed to work against technical faults, not deliberate sabotage. Bwah, ha, ha. End quote.
Yes.
And his spelling of bwah, ha, ha is not normal because he puts spaces in it. Yeah.
Oh,
no.
that is
Like when you're texting people.
For those who aren't aware, Lacey's reading the book with her eyes, and I'm doing the audiobook. So,
Yes.
yeah.
So, like, I love how people have different ways of messing with the written word, especially because we text all the time. Like, we have a friend who, when he sends you something that he's laughing, he doesn't write lol. He doesn't do ha 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 without spaces. No, this man does ha space, ha space, ha. And it drives me crazy because it sounds really condescending. It sounds like ha ha ha.
It's true.
And I'm like,
If you're watching this, stop it.
You know who you are. But like, and like my mom loves the word funner. I hate it. It drives me crazy. I know. Shh.
Now that we can talk anymore.
You have to pretend not to notice.
All right.
But she thinks it should be a real word. She has decided this.
To be fair, I don't actually disagree. Like,
right, exactly.
That ought to just be a word. I know it's not, but why not?
Why not? And that's her take on it. Is like, this is a stupid rule that we have.
Yeah.
So I'm making my own.
Yeah.
Which is very much my mother, and I'm my mother's daughter, and like we all have our little hills that we will either die on or not realize are our hills. Like mine is quotation marks. I like when you're quoting something, if you're ending with a period, fine.
Thank you, Jay Grape, for saying funner is great.
Oh, see,
Jay Grape has your mom's back.
he does.
Yeah.
Unlike you.
Unlike me. Thank you, Jay Grape. You would be a better son-in-law than I am.
We don't know this man. We just know that funner is on
excuse me, we don't know this grape.
We don't. That's great. That's right.
Yeah.
So, like the hill I will die on is if when things are in quotes, I like the punctuation to be on the outside of the quote unless it's part of the quote.
Yeah.
And I have my marketing director who we will get into the arguments about this. She's just wrong, and so are the rest of Americans who do this incorrectly.
Agreed. Heather, also, if you're watching, you're wrong.
Oh, you agree with me on this?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I just fell in love with you a little bit more. Sorry, Jay Grape. So anyway, this is
Jay Grape's attempt to steal my marriage is finally coming apart. Found my nemesis.
Anyway, I just like the little quirk here.
Yeah.
The blah ha ha and the Jimmy and like
Yes.
they're good. There are good moments of voice in this, and I just keep looking to Andy Weir and saying, like, I'm feeling like he does such an excellent job of doing it, which is, it's going to be interesting to watch the other side of the story and seeing if everybody or if specific people get really good voices.
Mm-hmm.
If their voices,
I have a note about that.
they won't be quite as strong because it's not first person.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is just different, but we'll see.
On that same sort of note, my last note here for chapter 5 is I really like this thing that he does over the course of the book where he's very careful with his rations and he's giving himself like half rations. You have to remember that this entire story is taking place and he's literally starving. He's eating like half as much as was allotted for him each day. He's desperately trying to grow food. Later in the story, they're going to be desperately trying to get him more food. Mm-hmm. It's all about this. But you know what? Every once in a while, he's like, I'm having a full portion. Like, I earned it today. I'm having more food than I'm allotted, and I know that that's not great, but I earned it. And it keeps tying back to, I love that he's not a superhero. He's not just, this is exactly what I need to do to survive, and so that's what I'm going to do to survive. It's like every once in a while, man, I blew myself up today. I'm having some extra food.
But there are days
we
that
all?
he is like, I came up with all I did today was come up with a plan that's likely to kill me. I am doing half portion, which is a quarter portion for him. So, he balances it out in a way that feels very real. Yeah. And
very human, like very sort of forgiving of his flawed nature.
Yes. Yeah. I like where he ends with this. As usual, I like how the chapter ends. Yeah. Which is to say, he says, I'm reluctant to hang out in a hab that has a history of exploding for no good reason. It exploded for a very good reason, Mark. You just don't know what it is, man.
You were the reason, Mark. It exploded because of you. It exploded from watching you. So yeah, chapter 6, we have...
I don't know what that was.
I learned it from watching you, like teenager slams their door and yeah. Anyway. So chapter 6, we have a major shift in perspective.
Yes.
We are no longer following Mark Watney. We are no longer on Mars at all. All of a sudden, this is a third-person novel about a whole bunch of different people living on Earth.
It's about Mindy Kaling. It's not, but in my head, it's about Mindy Kaling.
Before that, it's about...
Venk.
Yeah, Venk. But one of the things that I really hope I can find, or maybe one day when we meet Andy Weir, I can ask him, is I wonder how hard this was. Because you have to remember that this book was written as a blog. He was releasing it chapter by chapter. And he had established a pattern that we are reading the diary of our main character. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, we're not anymore. And we're following these characters that nobody's ever met. Most of them, nobody's ever heard of. We've heard about the crew of the Ares 3, but we had never heard about the administrators back at NASA. We don't know these characters. We haven't built up to them at all. And it's a total shift in not just the story, but in the structure of the story. We're shifting from a first-person narrative to a third-person narrative. And a part of me wonders if this is something that Andy Weir was like wrestling with for a while, trying to figure out like, is there any way to tell this story that I can stick to my format? And then this was like a big compromise, or was this something that he was like really looking forward to like getting out of Mark Watney's head for, like you were talking about, just to keep it from getting stale? There's something, I'm curious how this happened, because it is such a sudden and stark change.
It's not like Game of Thrones where every chapter you're
changing
somebody else's head. Yeah. It's a good question. We'll have to see if it's in an interview somewhere. Yeah. Because I'm sure somebody's asked him. It's been out for years.
Exactly. Or maybe we can get him on this show. We are pivoting suddenly from science to PR.
We are.
Immediately, the first conversation is, I don't want to take photos of the Ares 3 landing site because there's going to be Mark Watney's dead body, and we don't want to broadcast that to the world. All this kind of stuff. But it's still so smart. We're not talking about science anymore. We're talking about PR, but it's still very clever how these different characters are interacting and what each of them is working towards and the different things that you might not immediately think of. Yeah, we want to take a picture of the Ares 3 site, except, how would that play? And, okay, if it plays badly, then maybe we can make it about bringing his body back. And, the different jockeying for different ideas.
And Venk being ticked because this is why you've been keeping me from the satellites for months. This is for a month, I guess it would be, but this is so unacceptable, I'm surprised he didn't think of it himself. He seems like a pretty brilliant man, so I was surprised.
But he's a scientist, not an administrator. And I think that's the difference in perspective here. And that's actually a running theme, I think, in this whole chapter, is we're introduced to 4 new characters, and each one of them has a very different perspective and a very different take. One of them is an administrator. He's basically a white-collar, like a government employee. One of them is a project lead for Mars operations, so he's a leader, but in a sciencey way. Mindy is sort of deep science. Yeah, she's there with her hands on the keyboard.
She's a mechanical engineer who regrets taking this job because it's boring.
Exactly. And then later we get introduced to Annie Montrose, who is marketing. She's from a completely different perspective. So
Public relations, and she can't stop swearing, and it makes me so happy.
And that's one of the things that I have noted here is I love how each of these characters is differentiated. You know, we've been given this one lead who is so charming and so smart and so upbeat, but still human and so sort of perfectly rounded out that it would be easy to imagine that Andy Weir might be sort of like another Aaron Sorkin. And don't get me wrong, I adore Aaron Sorkin. But Aaron Sorkin's characters don't live on this planet. They are all from some other world where everybody is perfectly eloquent and perfectly smart and perfectly everything, perfectly loyal. And like, you know, he has a very distinct voice. I remember somebody, when I was in high school, my theater teacher talking about Shakespeare and how he's this incredible writer, but he doesn't do everything right. He doesn't do time right. Characters will say, hey, this is going to happen tomorrow, and then it'll happen in like an hour. And he doesn't write women well. All of his female characters talk like dudes. Like Juliet is a 14-year-old girl, and she talks like a 45-year-old man. And, you know, and that's fine. Like, you know, he didn't happen to have that one tool in his belt. That's fine. But I so appreciate that Andy Weir does. Each one of these characters talks differently. They think differently. They have a completely different perspective. And just the way they relate to each other is also individualized.
You missed two of the characters. Because we're not introduced to just 4 characters. Yeah. We're introduced to 6. Because we also meet Chuck and Morris.
Oh, yes.
Chuck and Morris are 2 scientists who are absolutely straight out from the 2P in the pod scientists in Better Off Ted.
Yes.
They like, and I'm sure that there are plenty of other examples that we could come up with of the 2P in the pod.
But just like bickering all the time.
Bickering and
correcting each other.
Oh my God.
Yes. It's charming.
It's charming. I'm also like, I follow their manager's train of thought, which is you guys are annoying the shit out of me. Like, just get to the freaking point. Yeah. Like, I understand. 14, 17 doesn't matter. Just get to the point.
Yeah. But we are getting a little ahead of ourselves. Mindy. So we have this conversation between the administrators, and then all of a sudden we cut to Mindy. And the note that I jotted down was somehow demystifying NASA makes it even cooler. That she's sitting here and she's like, why did I take this job? Like, this is so boring. I'm just sitting here handling satellites, and the satellites handle themselves.
And I'm really just emailing people when satellite images come in.
Yeah. And yet somehow it's still cool, you know?
I feel like I imagine a very meek Mindy Kaling. Yes. And I enjoy it. And if anybody tries to take this away from me, I will beat you. Because I figure if Martinez can be played by the actor who's a thief and Ant-Man, that my Mindy can be Mindy Kaling. Just putting it out there. Yeah.
Well, I'll be interested to see how you feel about Mindy in the movie, because she's definitely not that meek. They make her a little bit, I mean, she's still like an underling. She's not going to get in anybody's face, but she's a little more assertive. I actually really enjoyed the character in the book because she's kind of like, she kind of goes from bored to intimidated by her boss to holding back tears in a way that is not at all condescending to her character. Like, she discovered something that is overwhelming, and she is overwhelmed by it.
And also, I mean, I would cry too. Yeah. I mean, personally, because this is the moment that they discover that Mark Watney is alive. And they, you know, the day before they had his memorial, and all of the crew members gave their eulogies, and like the only person who didn't give one was Vennick, and he was like, why
Venkat.
What?
Venkat.
Oh, well,
Indian guy, Venkat Kapoor.
Oh, I did not write his name down. I apologize for getting that wrong. Okay, well.
And for those of you who may have only watched the movies, Venkat Kapoor was adapted by Chiwetel Ejiofor as Vincent Kapoor. And they actually reference at one point, a character asks him if he's religious, and he says that his mother was Hindu and his father was Baptist, I think, which is just a little indication to the fact that they cast a black guy to play an Indian character. Mm-hmm. So that's where Venkat Kapoor became Vincent Kapoor.
Well, I mean, that actor can pretty much do no wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is the point at which we discover that he's alive. And what I'm interested to hear is, how do you feel about their initial decision to not tell the crew?
To be honest, I wrestle with it. I don't really, I mean, like on the one, this is kind of weird to say, but I feel like if I had been in the room, I would have disagreed with whoever spoke first. like if somebody says we need to not tell them, I would have been like, are you kidding me? We have to tell them. And if somebody had said, well, we should tell them immediately, I would have been like, well, hold on a minute. Let's talk this through. Because it is such a big deal.
It is such a big deal.
These people are going to be devastated by the fact that they left him behind.
I want to know what the therapist said. Because there's someone there who has looked at all of this crew and has like walked them through. Like, what's that person have to say about it? Because it doesn't feel like that person has been asked, and I think it's really important that they do get asked.
At the end of the day, I feel like the distinguishing factor is sort of along the lines of when Captain America Civil War first came out. There was this huge conversation around, are you on Team Iron Man or are you on Team Cap? Do you agree that superheroes should be like regulated or not? And some people argued passionately on one side and some people argued passionately on the other. And the way I always saw it was, it sort of depends on how you see this universe. Because if this is a comic book universe, then obviously you trust Captain America. He's going to do no wrong. Like, he's Captain America. He's perfect. Of course, you just listen to him and you get out of his way. But if this is a realistic universe, there's no way on this planet that somebody from the 1930s should be trusted to do whatever he wants and not even have to explain why. And so it all just comes down to, do you view this as a comic book universe or as a realistic universe? And that's kind of how I think this question gets answered for me, is if this is a book where I expect that the hero is going to get rescued by the end, you tell them. But if this is real life and he's probably gonna starve to death, you don't want those 5 people locked in a tin can for 10 months while their best friend is slowly dying because they left him there. Like, that would just be so awful, looking down the barrel of, not only did he die, he's dying now. He's dying slowly.
I mean, I
like,
get it,
that's
but there's
awful.
There's something about not letting people be responsible for their own feelings and emotional reactions that I'm like, that really kind of
it's
like freaks me out.
Yeah, it's bad. It's just, I don't know, it's a tough call.
One of the arguments here is, space is dangerous and we need them to be focused. And there's a part of me that's like, these are still professionals. And yes, emotions can cloud their judgment. There's no denying that. But you take care of them and you do the best for them and you allow them to have an emotional reaction, because I think it would be devastating. And I don't know. I feel like there'd be trauma in not being told while the rest of the world would know. So I don't know. I just feel like let people be responsible for their own emotions.
We do have a comment here from Soliste. I apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly, because I'm quite confident I did not pronounce your name correctly. But would Alex and Lacey be bored working at NASA?
No.
No?
No.
For me, it depends entirely on what my job is. If I had Mindy's job, I would absolutely be bored.
I mean, sure.
Like, if I get to be Vincat, if I get to basically be Elon Musk or, whoever's sort of leading the charge, then no way I would take that job in a second. But, I mean, there are a lot of people at NASA whose whole job is just working spreadsheets.
I mean, yes, that's true. But, like, give me the job of being an astronaut, and I would listen, the adventure would be overwhelming. Tell me I'm going to Mars and all of my work would be about not showing my superiors that I'm terrified. And so I would not be allowed to be bored because I'd be so emotionally engaged.
So wired of just like,
yes, they'd be like, this woman is really uptight.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't seem this uptight when we took her on. Oh.
Speaking of funny reactions at NASA, by the way, I think it's time that we bring onto the stage Annie Montrose with the funniest just opening line ever. Like, for me, right up there with Mark Watney's opening line of the book, which is, I'm absolutely fucked. And she just, we've been given the administrator, who's very practical. We've been given Venkat, who's very sort of aspirational. We've given Mindy, who's just sort of trying to deal with what's going on. And then we're given Annie, who's just like,
I love
"Are you
Annie.
fucking kidding me?" Just like, do you understand the shitstorm that is coming toward us right now? And just so absolutely relatable in her own unique way.
So can I have a downer moment? You guys, I'm a really, really big optimist, and I love humans. I'm not one of those people who generally walks around and is like, people are stupid. Yes, every so often, but it's kind of rare for me because I really like people. Okay, but at one point, we hear that everybody's coming together and offering all of, we're all of their support, and I'm sitting here going, one is stuck alive on Mars, and NASA is getting support from all sectors. And I'm like, BS. Look at 2020. No way. There is a McConnell or a Lindsay out there that is pulling strings because they have some nefarious plot to screw everyone over. And absolutely, this does not happen. 2020 has burned this belief to the ground.
I will pick up the baton of defending
No!
the world from
Sorry,
you
it's
because
really loud.
Yes, it is.
No.
Because Apollo 13. Like, this is clearly the inspiration here.
That's not
is
where we
Apollo
are
13.
anymore.
All
I
right.
said it. No,
All
okay,
right.
you be an optimist. Go ahead. Bring us back.
So one of the things in this, we jumped ahead of one note that I have, which is I really appreciated the fact that even among these people sitting at NASA, they're being scientific. You get this whole conversation. Actually, you get two consecutive conversations where somebody sits down in front of a monitor and says, "Okay, prove it to me. Like, you think he's alive? Prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Walk me through. Here's where the rover was. Maybe they didn't mention that they moved it. Here, the solar panels are clean. They could have been cleaned by wind." And it just walks you through how to answer the question. And it just, I love that this book keeps bringing it back.
It's like the pop tense, and there's no body, and they
prove it. Don't tell me what you think. Don't tell me what you guess. Don't tell me what you hope. Prove it.
Yeah.
And that is the strength of this
That was one of
story.
my questions is how did you feel about it? I loved that moment of someone putting together, it's a little Sherlock moment of, well, one of the rovers is like facing the wrong direction for the hose to get to it or whatever, the cable to get to it. And it's like, oh, that would never have been done on purpose.
Yeah.
And except for we have all of these other little nuggets of information and
none of them are individually a smoking gun, but taken together, the likelihood that he's not alive is getting smaller and smaller. And
I love that one of the things that is said here is we've got 4 different ways of communicating. Why can't we communicate? Like, how did all 4 get taken away from us? Yeah. And they're like, well, all 4 are funneled through the MAV. Yeah. And it's like, oh, so we don't actually have 4 different ways of communicating. We have one. Yeah. And
it broke.
And it broke. Well, no, it's gone.
Well, 3 of them were through the MAV, and 1 of them was on the HAB, and the one on the HAB broke. So.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So. Because they even give the odds of like, what are the odds of that happening? And someone says, well, based on empirical evidence, it's 1 in 3.
Yeah, because it's Aries 1, 2, and 3, and it happened on one of them. So 3 tests and one time it happened. Well, I guess
Yeah.
I do love those 2 scientists arguing amongst themselves. And I absolutely love, they're trying to describe how strong a radio would have to be to get a signal to Mark. And they describe it as melting pigeons strong, which is just
so gross.
You get this image of like a giant death ray from a James Bond film, like trying to beam a message to Mars and just burning everything in its path.
New hole in the ozone layer.
Yeah, exactly. I will say, I mean, this whole series of episodes is basically just praising Andy Weir, but I really am impressed by somebody who is smart enough not only to come up with how do you solve this problem? How do you keep this character alive? How do you get him back home step by step in every way? But Andy Weir has actually done like 6 or 7 times because he keeps coming up with other ways that they could have saved him. You know, in this chapter, we're given this like, well, I mean, the Ares 4 crew could land at the Ares 3 site and then use the MDV to kind of hop over to their landing site. And it's really risky, but it could work. And it's like, you just solved the problem again. Like as a writer, you just wrote a whole other book of how this could have gone. And God, what a genius it takes to not only solve the problem, but solve it 9 different ways. 9
different ways, but then to also poke holes in
his own theories.
Yeah. I freaking love this guy.
Yes, exactly.
He can write a lot more. You know, we had Joss Whedon for a long time of going like, oh, this is our nerd guy that we love, and you know, we still do, but you know, he's got his problematic things, and so
we need more Andy Weir.
Yeah, please. I'm here for it. Like if more sci-fi was written by Andy Weir, I'd read more sci-fi.
True.
So
so my next note is about the last line of the chapter. What else do you have?
I'm good. I'm ready to go.
All right. I love the ending of this chapter. It's my single favorite moment in the entire book. And I was so crushed that they didn't put it in the movie, but they did put it in one of the when they released The Martian, they also made a series of short films that were about the astronaut training program before the Ares 3 mission. And it was like these sort of NASA documentaries of like, meet the crew of the Ares 3. And they worked this line into one of those, which I really appreciated, which is Venkat Kapoor is sitting at NASA sort of looking up at the sky and just talking about like how alone Mark Watney must feel and how overwhelmed and how stressful, and God, it's just what does it do to somebody to be that alone? What must he be thinking right now? And then the last line of the chapter is log entry, Sol 61. How come Aquaman can control whales? They're mammals. It doesn't make sense. End of chapter. And it's just such a perfect summation of Mark Watney as a character. Because not only is it funny, it's also like kind of a good point. You know, like it's kind of a smart question in a funny way. And it just perfectly sums up who this guy is and why he's the one that is actually going to make it through this.
Yes. Well done. Well done.
So excellent. So that is it for this week. That is chapters 4 through 6. We're going to be picking up with chapter 7 next week, and chapter 7 brings us back to Mars. So we've introduced these characters on Earth.
And we're leaving them behind.
And then we're leaving them behind. We're getting back to Mark Watney and starting to do some long-term planning. We've been flying by the seat of our pants for a while, just trying to figure out how we're going to make food and water. But now that we've got that locked down, let's start talking about the long-term plan.
And the potatoes are sprouting.
And the potatoes are sprouting, which is very exciting.
It's very exciting.
So yeah, that is going to be next week. We are going to be talking about chapters 7 through 9 or 10, probably. We'll see how long they are. And yeah, I think that's it for this episode. Got any final thoughts?
No.
All right.
You guys have a great night. Thank you for being with us. We will see you next week.
Yep. This is so much fun. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell and everything so you can get our future episodes.
Bye, guys.